I had a daughter with my childhood sweetheart in the future, and somehow she traveled back to our present time. She told me that in the future, I not only abused her but also cheated on her father. Even worse, I eventually abandoned them both to run away with a rich man. That's why she'd rather erase her own existence than let me and her father end up together. I watched her desperately trying to match him up with other girls, and I couldn't help but smirk inside. She had no idea that I'd already seen what the future holds. On our way home from school, a girl pulled me and my childhood sweetheart into an alley behind the school gates. The girl was beautiful, but something seemed off. She kept insisting on calling us mom and dad. After a moment of silence, I reached out to feel her forehead. "Hey girl, are you okay?" She impatiently swatted my hand away, then turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Dad, everything I'm saying is true. I really am your daughter from the future." Ethan looked at her with exasperation. "If you're sick, you should go to the hospital." He grabbed my hand and started to leave, but the girl quickly grabbed the hem of his uniform, speaking rapidly. "Isn't your phone password Aurora's birthday? Don't you have a special diary where you write down everything Aurora likes? Aren't you planning to confess to her on her birthday?" I froze, sneaking a glance at him beside me. The usually proud and dignified boy was blushing uncontrollably. He shot me a quick look and said through gritted teeth, "How do you know all that?" The girl looked pleased with herself. "Because I'm your most beloved daughter." I hadn't noticed earlier, but now as I studied her delicate features carefully, I realized her eyes were indeed remarkably similar to his. Something clicked in my mind and I asked her, "What's your name?" The girl seemed to really dislike talking to me. She answered dismissively, "Everly Jiang." Hearing that name made my heart race, because I had once imagined that if I ever married Ethan and had a daughter, I would name her Everly Jiang, meaning endless love, hoping that Aurora and Ethan would stay madly in love even when their hair turned gray. Looking at Everly's animated expressions, an indescribable bitterness stirred in my heart. I unconsciously reached out to stroke Everly's hair, but she dodged away from my touch. When her gaze swept over me, it carried obvious disgust. "Dad, please stop loving Aurora, okay?" Her voice carried genuine hatred. "You're so good to her, but she's never satisfied. In the future, she not only abuses me but also cheats on you with some rich guy. When you caught them, they even hurt you." We both stood there stunned. Everly spoke with such raw emotion that Ethan couldn't help but be affected. He instinctively defended me. "That's impossible. Aurora is a good girl." Everly looked exasperated. "I'm from the future, I know exactly what kind of person she is. You're just too in love with her right now, that's why you're missing out on your true soulmate." As Ethan was about to argue back, a soft voice came from the entrance of the alley. Ethan." Ethan's handsome face turned cold when he saw who it was, but Everly's eyes lit up. "Aunt Melanie." Following their gaze, I saw Melanie standing at the alley entrance. She wore an oversized uniform, thick glasses that covered half her face, and when she spoke with her heavy accent, you could see her braces. Everyone's first impression of her was that she was unremarkable. But this same Melanie had done something nobody expected. She had publicly confessed to Ethan during a school basketball game. Ethan had politely rejected her then, but the incident became gossip fodder for Central High students, with everyone secretly mocking her for being delusional and ugly girl reaching too high. We thought Melanie would give up, but she didn't. After that, wherever Ethan went, you'd find her there. Eventually, Ethan got annoyed and started being cold to her, sometimes even making sarcastic remarks. But Melanie stayed, still chasing after him. Now, Ethan gave her the cold shoulder again and tried to pull me away. But as we passed her, she grabbed his sleeve. Ethan looked at her hand, his eyebrows furrowing. Melanie immediately let go and carefully pulled out 2 movie tickets from her backpack. "Ethan, this weekend, could I treat you to a movie? As thanks for helping me last time." Melanie came from a poor family, and with her distinct accent, she was often mocked as a country bumpkin at school. It had started with just verbal attacks, but after she confessed to Ethan, she completely angered this girl gang leader who had a secret crush on him. The leader started bullying Melanie with her little group until Ethan found out and warned them off. Ethan didn't take Melanie's tickets. Instead, he raised an eyebrow and asked, "You can barely afford tuition, why are you wasting money on movie tickets?" Melanie's face reddened as she looked down and whispered, "I earned it working part-time these past few days." Ethan paused, awkwardly avoiding her eyes before saying harshly, "Not free. It's Aurora's birthday this weekend." As Ethan pulled me away from the alley, I looked back. I saw Everly stomping her feet in frustration, while Melanie stared intensely at our linked hands. In her eyes, I saw thick jealousy, resentment, and even hatred. Can't blame her. As Ethan's childhood friend, I not only spent the most time with him, but my family background and looks were also considered a good match for him. People often used me as a tool to humiliate Melanie. But I never liked that. Only after warning them multiple times did they finally stop comparing me to Melanie. Melanie had confronted me once, telling me I was just lucky if she had my background and looks. She could definitely stand beside Ethan too. I was thinking about solving a math problem in my head at the time, but I still smiled and replied, Melanie, instead of telling me all this, why don't you go solve some more problems? Since we can't change what we're born with, why not work hard to change your future? Unfortunately, Melanie took my well-meaning words as mockery about her poor grades, making her dislike me even more. Coming back to reality, we'd reached my building. Before parting, I asked Ethan what he thought about Everly's story. He scoffed, just because she has the surname Jeong, she thinks she can pretend to be my daughter. Then he sneaked a glance at me, his ears turning red. Besides, our future daughter would never badmouth you like that. She'd be sweet just like you. My heart melted with sweetness. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Could time travel really exist? Maybe the name was just a coincidence. Perhaps because of today's bizarre events, I had a strange dream that night. I dreamed I was sitting at an unfamiliar vanity, about to send a message on my phone. I saw a message from someone saved as Xavier Ming, run away with me. And I had already typed but not sent, okay. It all felt so absurd that I quickly looked up, catching my reflection in the mirror. The woman's features were still beautiful, but deep exhaustion lingered on her face, as if she'd been through hell. Before I could make out more details of my surroundings, my alarm clock woke me up. Time for school. I sighed, thinking I must be losing my mind. That weekend, friends gathered to celebrate my birthday. After dinner, we planned to go singing. I was both excited about Ethan's birthday gift and wondering if he would confess to me today. But Ethan was clearly distracted, constantly checking his watch. When it suddenly started thundering and raining outside, he went out to make a phone call, clearly agitated. When he came back, he still seemed lost in thought. Half of my excitement instantly vanished. I wanted to ask him, didn't he say he didn't care about Melanie's invitation? Why was he acting like this now? My best friend Ing noticed the tension between us and quickly picked a romantic duet, teasing us to sing together. Ethan snapped back to reality and looked at me tenderly. May this night have the honor of singing with Princess Aurora. This was our childhood game. Ethan played the knight who slayed the dragon, and I was the kidnapped princess. Every time he rescued me, he'd shamelessly demand a kiss. My mood lifted a bit and I nodded. But halfway through our song, someone burst in. It was Everly. My heart ached a little seeing her drenched from the rain. Ignoring everyone's surprised looks, Everly rushed to Ethan's side. Dad, please go save Melanie. She's been caught by her father's debt collectors. She's in danger. Ethan froze for a second, then ran out before Everly could say anything else. My mind went blank for a moment, but my feet honestly followed after him. It was pouring outside. I struggled to keep up with Ethan, shouting his name. But he never looked back, just kept running faster and faster. Suddenly, I slipped and fell, something cutting my calf. Blood dripped into the cold rainwater, quickly disappearing. I gritted my teeth and stood up, mentally cursing Ethan for being stupid enough to run out without an umbrella. But wait, why didn't I bring one either? I thought sadly. Turned out I was just as stupid as him. But when I finally limped to the movie theater, I realized I was the only truly stupid one. I watched as Ethan knocked down all the debt collectors, then pulled Melanie into a tight embrace, holding her close. Finally, I watched as he took off his jacket to cover both their heads, and they ran away together. Suddenly, an umbrella appeared over my head. I stared blankly at Everly standing beside me. Her face was blurry in the darkness, but her tone was dripping with sarcasm. See that? She's my dad's true love. What are you compared to that? Ignoring her words, I asked instead, aren't you cold? Everly froze, stared at me for a long moment, then forcefully shoved the umbrella into my hands. What a stupid woman, she spat before running off into the heavy rain. I stood there helplessly, holding the umbrella. The handle still held traces of Everly's warmth, but the cool breeze was quickly stealing it away, just like my heart, gradually turning to ice. Just then, an unfamiliar car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, revealing my best friend Ying's face. She called out, Aurora, get in, quick. I hesitated, worried about getting the car seats wet with my rain-soaked clothes. But Ing kept urging me anxiously, so I finally opened the door and climbed in. Thanks, Ing. I was just starting to recover from everything that had happened. Ing brushed it off. Come on, we're best friends, no need for thanks. Besides, you should thank my uncle. Lucky he was picking me up, or I wouldn't have caught up with you. I quickly turned to thank the middle-aged man in the driver's seat, but Ing burst out laughing. Wrong person, Aurora. Mr. Chen is our chauffeur, my uncle's the one in the passenger seat. Still dazed, I looked toward the front seat. From this angle, I could only see the young man's tense profile. "Thank you," I said awkwardly. The young man didn't seem pleased, his tone cold. "It's nothing." Ing winked at me and whispered, "Don't mind him, Aurora. He's like this with everyone, always walking around with that face like the world owes him millions." I pressed my lips together, unsure what to say, but the young man in front spoke up flatly, "Ing, if you don't want me telling my brother about your failed exam, zip it." Ing made a face at him and was about to retort when she noticed my bleeding leg. "Oh my god. Aurora, what happened to your leg? There's so much blood." I was about to say it's nothing, but Ying's uncle immediately told Mr. Chen, "Hospital." At the hospital, the doctor carefully cleaned my wound and prescribed some medicine. While Ing went to get the prescription filled, her uncle and I waited in the lobby. The place was packed with almost no seats available. My leg was starting to throb from standing, forcing me to balance on one foot. Suddenly, an arm extended in front of me. I looked at her uncle in surprise. He kept his head turned away, his tone slightly awkward. "You can lean on me." Without any hesitation, I thanked him and took his arm. After a while, he suddenly spoke again. "Aurora, do you really not remember me?" Under the bright lights, I could finally see Ying's uncle's full face. His features were like a masterpiece carved by an artist, exquisite and perfect. Yet his dark pupils seemed to reflect no light, always carrying a hint of coldness. I searched my memories carefully but realized that besides Ing, I had no other connection to him. Besides, Ing rarely talked about her family. I didn't even know until tonight that her uncle was so young. So I looked at him questioningly. The young man lowered his eyes, seeming disappointed. He said, "Qin Xiao Hai, third negative debater." Like a bolt of lightning, I suddenly remembered last year's debate competition at Qin Xiao Hai. Our school faced the host team, and their third debater, though not talkative, made every word count. Of course, I didn't back down, and the debate eventually turned into a face-off between us. I remembered his name was. I tentatively called out, "Xavier." The young man finally smiled, like ice beginning to thaw. But I couldn't smile back because I suddenly remembered my dream. Xavier Ming, apparently my future affair partner. When the uncle-niece pair dropped me home, Ing pulled me aside worriedly. "Aurora, what's really going on between you and Ethan?" The image of Ethan running away with Melanie flashed in my mind again, making my heart ache like it was being pricked by needles. I forced a smile for Ing, telling her everything was fine. But only I knew that I had started feeling threatened by Melanie, someone I'd never taken seriously before. Maybe it was the rain, but I developed a high fever that night. In my feverish state, I had another strange dream. A gloomy room without a trace of sunlight. I was collapsed on the floor, watching helplessly as an obviously more mature Ethan walked away. After what felt like forever, someone pulled me up. Their hand was noticeably smaller than mine, but their palm was incredibly warm. They led me downstairs and pushed me into someone's embrace. That person's embrace carried a faint orange scent, which somehow made me feel inexplicably safe. When I woke up again, 2 days had passed. Mother was by my bedside, her eyes full of worry. Only after I assured her I was fine did she relax and hand me the porridge she'd made. As I ate, I suddenly noticed a beautifully wrapped box on my bedside table. Mother explained, "I don't know what's going on with you kids. The day you came home and collapsed, Ethan showed up looking completely disheveled. When he found out you had a fever, he stayed by your bedside all night, refusing to leave no matter what. He left this box, said it was your birthday gift." I remained silent. When Mother went to wash the dishes, I opened the box to find an exquisitely crafted necklace inside. The crystal swan pendant sparkled in the light. This was the necklace I'd spotted while out with Ethan last time, but hadn't bought because it was too expensive. I remember I hadn't shown much interest in it then, just secretly glanced at it a few times. So how did Ethan know? The next day, as soon as I stepped out, I saw Ethan waiting at my door. He gave me a tentative smile and offered me a cup of soy milk. But I didn't take it. Instead, I walked straight past him and down the stairs without sparing him a glance. Ethan quickly caught up and tried to take my backpack. Of course, I wouldn't let him have it, and we ended up in a tug of war right there on the street. In my frustration, I suddenly let go, causing Ethan to lose his balance and land right on his behind. I couldn't help but laugh. Seeing me laugh, Ethan immediately jumped up and came to my side. He said softly, "I'm so sorry, Aurora. I was wrong. I shouldn't have left you standing there that day, and I should have heard you calling after me. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. If you're still angry, you can hit me." By the end, he actually looked hurt. "Just don't ignore me. I can't stand you ignoring me." I looked at him for a long moment before saying coolly, "But I saw you hugging Melanie." Ethan immediately panicked. He grabbed my sleeve, insisting, "She was just so scared, I was only trying to comfort her. I don't have any feelings for her at all." Seeing my expression grow colder, Ethan grabbed my hand, his tone pleading, "I really messed up, Aurora. You know you're the only one I've ever liked, the only one I want to marry." I froze because this was the first time Ethan had ever said these things to me. In the past, though we both understood our feelings for each other, we'd never actually confessed. I'd always wanted to hear him say he liked me, but now that I finally had, it didn't make me as happy as I'd imagined. Probably because of what happened that day. I sighed, ignored him, and walked away. Ethan followed behind me, carrying my backpack. For the first time, our walk to school was silent, without our usual playful banter. At the school gate, I saw him getting out of her car. Seeing the strange atmosphere between me and Ethan, she was smart enough not to ask questions. I linked arms with her, but just as the car door was closing, I caught a glimpse of Xavier sitting inside. His eyes were still cold, especially when he saw Ethan beside me. His displeasure was almost palpable. Suddenly, I became curious. How did my future self end up wanting to run away with Xavier? Time flew by. Ethan and I seemed to return to our old dynamic. Perhaps because we'd grown up together, we'd become so integrated into each other's daily lives that it wasn't easy to break away. But I could clearly feel my feelings for Ethan slowly disappearing. When did I first realize this? Probably when Melanie stopped coming to school for a while. I noticed Ethan often staring absently at the classroom door during breaks, unconsciously searching for someone after basketball practice, and even absent-mindedly writing Melanie's name on paper, though he'd angrily crumple it up and throw it in the trash afterward. Habits are terrifying things. Like how I was used to having Ethan by my side, and now Ethan was used to having Melanie following him around, impossible to shake off. Watching his confused, troubled expression, I wanted to tell him, "If you care so much, just go find her. Besides, my feelings aren't some cheap commodity. Once Ethan uses them all up, I'll walk away without looking back." Though that's what I told myself, my heart still ached. Everything changed one afternoon. I was reading under the gardenia tree near the school playground when Ethan stormed up to me, furious. In my memory, he rarely got angry with me. The few times he did were when I hurt myself by not listening to him. But this time was different. It was about Melanie. Ethan threw Melanie's diary at my feet and demanded, "Aurora, why did you say those things to her?" He stared at me with disappointment. "I already explained to you that I don't like her. Melanie's been keeping her distance from me, so why are you still humiliating her behind my back?" I quietly watched Ethan's outburst, then picked up the diary. As I read, I couldn't help but laugh. Melanie claimed I'd not only mocked her behind her back for shamelessly chasing Ethan, but also had people bully her. She even mentioned our private conversation, where I told her to focus on her studies. She wrote, "A casual comment from someone at the top makes those already drowning in darkness feel even more worthless. Maybe I shouldn't even exist in this world." I tossed the notebook back to Ethan, my voice steady. "Do you really believe what she's saying?" Ethan leaned against the tree, laughing bitterly. "Does it matter if I believe it or not? Aurora, Melanie has depression. Who would joke about something like that?" Instead of responding, I stepped forward and slapped him. Ethan was stunned for a moment, then grabbed my wrist tightly and said, "Aurora, you need to own up when you're wrong. I could put up with your attitude before, but this is different. This is about someone's life. Come on, you're coming with me to apologize to Melanie." I tried to shake my hand free but couldn't, so I used my other hand to slap him again. "I didn't do any of those things. Believe it or not, I don't care. You want me to apologize to her? In your dreams." I turned away, tears streaming down my face. How did we end up here? Ethan started going to Melanie's house every day, claiming he was looking after her on my behalf, apologizing for me. When I heard that, I felt sick to my stomach. I knew Ethan too well. He was just using me as an excuse to see Melanie openly. Ethan's family lived upstairs from mine, and sometimes I'd run into him at the stairwell on the way to school. Every time, he'd look at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I knew he wanted to make up, but I thought he was being ridiculous, unable to let go of Melanie but not wanting to lose me either. Completely insane. That day, I was doing homework when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I opened my messages to find multiple photos of Ethan and Melanie. In the photos, Ethan was smiling at Melanie tenderly, his gaze holding feelings he hadn't even noticed himself. And Melanie, as if knowing I would see these photos, shot a challenging smirk at the camera when Ethan wasn't looking. So much for having depression. My fingers gripped the phone tightly as I waited for the sender to say more. Soon enough, another message came through. "Mom, say goodbye to your 17-year-old true love. Next, I'm going to tell Ethan a truth that will make him leave you forever." It was Everly. I wasn't too concerned, just curious about how terrible my future self must be for Everly to risk her own existence to prevent me and Ethan from getting together. but her efforts weren't wasted. The ending really would be as she wished. Still, whenever I thought about Everly disappearing, my heart would ache dully. Was it because of our blood connection? Everly worked fast. The next day after school, Ethan pulled me into an empty classroom. Of course, Everly and Melanie were there too. Ethan didn't waste time. With reddened eyes, he demanded, "Aurora, that summer at my grandmother's house in the countryside when I fell into that deep pit, who really saved me?" I froze, finally realizing what he was talking about. Back then, Ethan had just started middle school when he got into a car accident that left him unable to walk for a long time. During that period, his temper became violent and strange, throwing things at the slightest frustration. Nobody wanted to be around him anymore, even his parents tried to avoid him when possible. But I was foolish enough to think he was just hurting, that if I stayed with him until he could walk again, he'd eventually return to being the gentle Ethan I knew. So I endured his bad temper, helped with his rehabilitation exercises every day, and sometimes told jokes to cheer him up. Of course, I also explained the school lessons he missed, making 2 copies of all my notes. But Ethan remained gloomy. Until that summer, when we visited his grandmother's house in the countryside. I remember he insisted on going out alone in his wheelchair. When he hadn't returned by evening, I got worried and went looking for him, only to find him collapsed beside a deep pit. I frantically called his name until he finally came to. When he saw it was me, he hugged me with tears in his eyes. "I'll listen to you. I'll live properly." Now, Ethan was looking at me painfully, wanting an answer. I said, "I don't know. I only found you lying beside the pit." But Melanie looked at me tearfully. "You're lying. You deceived Ethan. If it weren't for you, how could Ethan and I have missed all these years?" I thought he still remembered me. I looked at them coldly, speaking each word clearly. "I'll say it again, I really don't know who saved him. Ethan woke up and didn't say anything, so how would I know what happened?" Then, mockingly, "Besides, I never said I saved him. Whatever he imagined has nothing to do with me. I, Aurora, would never steal what belongs to someone else." "Enough." Ethan finally snapped, looking at me with complete disappointment. "Aurora, all these years, I've been loving the wrong person." I stayed silent for a long time, then suddenly laughed. "Ethan, I'm curious, if a stray dog had saved you that day, would you have fallen in love with it too? Your love sure comes cheap." So cheap, he wasn't worthy of me. Everly was right, it was time to say goodbye to my 17-year-old heart. Finally, Ethan left with a crying Melanie. I leaned against the wall exhaustedly, my mind in chaos. A soft gasp suddenly rang out, and I turned to see Everly, forgotten by everyone, standing in the corner with a nosebleed. I frantically tried to call emergency services, but she stopped my hand. With no other choice, I took her to the bathroom to clean up. Outside the school gates, seeing Everly standing there lost in thought, I felt an inexplicable ache in my heart. Almost possessed, I walked back to her. "Want to stay at my place tonight?" I asked straightforwardly. She hesitated to answer, but thankfully, she agreed. When we got home, Mom had already prepared dinner and was sitting with Dad on the couch waiting for me. I told them Everly was my classmate staying over tonight. They were both fine with it, even holding her hand the whole time, clearly taking a liking to her. It was rare to see the usually prickly Everly being so sweet and quiet. Suddenly, Mom exclaimed in surprise, looking at her like this. Everly's nose and mouth actually looked quite similar to Aurora's. Even that little mole between her nose, Aurora used to have one just like it before she had it removed. I froze, joining them in looking at Everly while she looked back at me with complicated emotions. At first, I'd only noticed how Everly resembled Ethan, but I hadn't realized she had features like mine too. It was an indescribable feeling that in this world, besides my parents, there was someone else who shared my blood so closely. Worried my parents might notice something odd, I pulled Everly back to my room after dinner. Perhaps because she was sleeping beside me, that night I had an incredibly long dream. In the dream, I married Ethan. He still pampered me like when we were young, treating me like some fragile treasure. We had many sweet moments, truly staying passionately in love just as I'd imagined. Until our first fight after marriage. It started because he didn't want me to go back to work after having our daughter. We fought terribly that time, even alarming both sets of parents. Ethan didn't come home for many days because of it. But in the end, he was the first to apologize. He told me sadly that he didn't want me to be so tired, having to care for our daughter while working. He said he was perfectly capable of supporting me, that I just needed to be his princess. I softened and finally agreed, completely returning to family life. At first, Ethan would always come home on time and bring me various gifts. But gradually, he started coming home later and later, sometimes carrying unfamiliar perfume scents. I grew suspicious and one day made a surprise visit to his company, only to find Melanie hanging on his arm, both of them laughing together. The Melanie in my dream had completely shed her high school timidity. She'd removed her thick glasses, wore sophisticated makeup, and appeared confident and graceful. When they saw me, they hurriedly sat apart. Melanie greeted me, but I ignored her and looked at Ethan instead. Ethan was clearly flustered. After sending Melanie out of the office, he grabbed my hand to explain. If Ethan felt guilty at first, later he grew impatient with me, even comparing me to Melanie. He said I wasn't as strong as Melanie, not as confident and composed. During that time, my mother had just been hospitalized and I was under immense pressure. When he said those things, I completely broke down. That's when I met Xavier. He was my mother's attending physician. He told me that Aurora was Aurora and didn't need to be compared to anyone else. Just that one sentence brought me back to life. At the end of the dream, I saw Xavier reaching out his hand to me, saying, "I've always been here. You just need to turn around to see me." This dream felt incredibly real, making me believe it might be my somewhat tragic future. When I woke up, my face still had traces of tears. Looking up, I saw Everly sitting at the desk, chin propped up, staring absently at a family photo. In the photo, I was linking arms with my parents, smiling brightly. "Everly, why did you lie to me?" I suddenly spoke. Everly jumped, startled, then stared at me blankly. I smiled bitterly. It was Ethan who cheated. Everly shot up. "How did you know?" Instead of answering, I looked at her panicked eyes and said slowly, "Why did you really come back? Do you really hate me that much? Willing to erase yourself just to bring Ethan and Melanie together?" Everly lowered her head, hiding her expression, but her voice trembled. "Yes, I hate you the most." Then she ran out of the room. My fingers clenched painfully. I really couldn't understand why she would do this. Ethan and Melanie got together. I heard the news while attending Ying's birthday party at her house. Making a casual excuse, I left the crowded front hall. Everyone's pitying looks made me uncomfortable. Yeah, who would have thought that Melanie, whom they all looked down on, would actually win over Central High's most popular boy? And that was with me, his childhood sweetheart, already in the picture. Without realizing it, I wandered into the Xia family's small garden, where I happened to see Xavier sitting on a swing, reading. The gentle breeze ruffled his black bangs, revealing his perpetually calm eyes. He had a box of candy on his knee, which looked like he'd already eaten half of. I couldn't help but smile. This young master had quite the unexpected side to him. Hearing movement, Xavier looked up. Seeing me smiling at his candy, his ears suddenly turned red, though he tried to maintain his composure. "Want some?" I nodded, taking the candy from him and sitting on the swing beside him. Suddenly, I thought of that dream. I asked him, if in the future, I become unremarkable, lose my shine, will anyone still like me? I knew my question was strange, but Xavier answered seriously. "Definitely." My heart unconsciously sped up and I asked, "Why?" Xavier smiled, his smile like brilliant stars twinkling in the night sky. I'll never forget when I first saw Aurora, her confident and composed eyes during that debate. Even though Central High was at a disadvantage, she still fearlessly presented her views. Though narrowly defeated, she won everyone's applause. I've always believed someone like that could never become ordinary. Even if there are moments of setback, they'll eventually regroup and find their light again. Xavier looked into my eyes, his tone gentle, but actually, no matter how many people love you, it's not as important as loving yourself first. Never doubt yourself because of what others say. My eyes grew warm, but my heart suddenly felt clear. Looking up at the azure sky, I said softly, "Thank you, Xavier." Besides giving gifts, I also took him to an amusement park. The two of us had a blast all day, our spirits soaring. When it was time to go home, Mr. Chen came with Xavier to pick us up, but Ing had to leave early for a private birthday celebration her parents had planned. I didn't want to trouble them to take me home, but Xavier suddenly placed a rabbit headband on my head. "Come on, it's no trouble." But just as we reached my building, I saw Ethan and Melanie. They were getting cozy, their lips about to meet when Ethan suddenly spotted me. For some reason, he immediately pushed Melanie away, looking flustered. Melanie's expression instantly darkened, but she quickly latched onto Ethan's arm, giving me a challenging look. "What a coincidence, Aurora." Then she glanced at Xavier beside me, paused, and her eyes filled with complex emotions. "Found someone new already. Good, now you can stop obsessing over other people's boyfriends." When Ethan heard this, his eyebrows furrowed deeply, his tone inexplicably cold. "Aurora, who is this guy?" I didn't want to engage with them, but their behavior made me sick. "How is that any of your business? And stop calling me Aurora like we're close." I raised an eyebrow at Melanie's twisted expression. "I wouldn't want to upset your girlfriend." I turned to leave, but Ethan blocked my path, demanding an explanation. Xavier immediately stepped in front of me protectively. Half a head taller than Ethan, his hostile gaze created an intimidating presence. Ethan had no choice but to let me go, though he watched me reluctantly. Xavier flicked one of my rabbit ears, chuckling softly, "Go on up, little bunny." My face inexplicably reddened as I hurried upstairs. That evening, Ethan knocked on my door. Outside, he wore his usual smile, speaking cheerfully, "My parents aren't home tonight. Can I have dinner at your place?" In the past, I would have happily pulled him inside, but now looking at his face only irritated me. "Ethan, don't you think this is ridiculous? Don't tell me you're dating Melanie but still haven't gotten over me." Ethan maintained his smile, though pain flashed in his eyes. "Aurora, so we can't even be friends anymore?" "No." I refused firmly, then slammed the door shut. After a moment, I opened it again. Ethan's dim eyes suddenly brightened, but before he could speak, I threw a box at his feet. "These are all the things you've given me over the years. Take them back. Don't bother returning what I gave you. I don't want them." Ethan stared blankly at the items on the ground, then bent down to pick up the topmost box. Opening it revealed the crystal swan necklace, still sparkling. He asked, "What about this one? You don't want it either. You loved it so much." I looked at him coldly. "Things are different now. It's tainted." The old Ethan, who could read my heart with just a glance, was truly gone. I never told him that I'd noticed him eating instant noodles for a month to save money for it, so he'll never know how much I once wanted to grow old with him. As I closed the door, I saw Ethan clutching the necklace tightly, his face twisted with confusion and pain. My life seemed to return to normal. Just minus Ethan and plus Xavier. Xavier would drop me off when picking up and invite me to study at the library on weekends. Finally, after another library invitation from Xavier, I couldn't help but ask, "Xavier, are you pursuing me?" Because someone with his personality wouldn't normally be so proactive with the same person. His eyes showed confusion. "Yeah, isn't it obvious?" I was speechless. "Who has dates at the library?" And his serious expression when arguing about different math solutions only made people think he saw me as an academic rival. I sighed, stood on tiptoe, and whispered in his ear, "How about we go to the beach next week? I heard there'll be fireworks at night." Xavier's face immediately turned red, and he pressed his lips together, nodding vigorously. I finally smiled with satisfaction. Just after Xavier dropped me home, heavy rain started falling. Looking at the thick curtain of rain, I thought about how long it had been since I'd seen Everly. Or maybe, did she even exist anymore? A wave of loss washed over me, tinged with bitterness. "Aurora." A voice suddenly came from behind. I turned to see Ethan. His face was sad but his eyes held joy. "Aurora, Melanie, and I broke up." I paused, then said flatly, "That has nothing to do with me. You didn't need to come tell me specifically." I started to go upstairs, but Ethan suddenly hugged me from behind. A faint smell of alcohol surrounded me. I wrinkled my nose in disgust. "Ethan, let go." Ethan's voice was choked with tears. "Aurora, I was wrong. I just realized you're the one I've always loved. I can't get used to life without you by my side. Can you forgive me?" By the end, he was sobbing. But I felt nothing, just stomped hard on his foot. Taking advantage of his pain to break free, I stood on the stairs looking down at him. "Honestly, Ethan, you're being pathetic and disgusting right now." Thinking of his future with Melanie, I felt deep hatred toward him. "Ethan, maybe I should thank you for leaving me." I turned away without looking at his grief-stricken face. But through the pouring rain, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. I eagerly tried to see her face clearly, but in the blink of an eye, she was gone. I smiled bitterly, wondering if I was just seeing things because I missed her so much. Ethan was caught by Melanie's family's debt collectors. They were set on revenge, so they were brutal. He was hit in the head and rushed straight into surgery. When Mom told me the news, I was planning summer vacation activities with Ing. Looking at the red light above the operating room, I remembered his message from just hours ago. "Aurora, summer's almost here. Want to go to the beach together?" Since our last meeting, he'd been messaging me daily, but I never replied, even blocking him. He didn't know I already had someone else to go to the beach with. Ethan's parents sat crying on the bench outside the operating room, while my parents tried to comfort them, wiping away their own tears. I stared blankly at the hospital's white walls, hoping Ethan would be okay. Though I hated him, I didn't want him dead. Suddenly, at the end of the hallway, I saw Everly in a white dress. I walked toward her and she took my hand, showing me a gentleness I'd never seen before. "Mom, it's my birthday today. Could you make me one more bowl of noodles?" I paused, looking at her hopeful eyes, and finally agreed. We left the hospital, and I borrowed a nearby restaurant's kitchen to quickly make Everly a bowl of noodles. The steam blurred her features, hiding her expression. Then she suddenly spoke. "I'm the one who told those people where to find Ethan." She looked up. "I'm the reason he's lying in the hospital between life and death." I stared at her, my mind bursting with questions. I wanted to ask, weren't you always helping Ethan? Didn't you always hate me? Why would you do this now? But in the end, I was just too tired. Everything Everly did, everything she said, I never seemed to understand. Maybe because the day had drained me so much, I fell asleep at the table. And once again, I dreamed of the future, but this time, all about my daughter, Everly. I saw her as a newborn, her grape-sized eyes sparkling as she smiled at me. I saw her at 5, bringing me a birthday cake made of Play-Doh when Ethan forgot my birthday, singing happy birthday. I saw her at 10, proudly declaring at parent-teacher conferences, I have the best mom in the whole world. I saw her at 13, threatening her father with a knife after he slapped me for learning I wasn't the one who saved him, choosing Melanie instead. Finally, I saw her at 15. She found Xavier at the hospital and looked at him seriously. If you ever treat my mom badly, I won't let you get away with it. Xavier, in his white coat, didn't laugh at the girl's childish threat. Instead, he bent down and offered his pinky. I understand. Let's pinky promise. Everly linked pinkies with him, beaming. After leaving the hospital, she found a secluded spot and pulled out an old-fashioned phone. All right, if you can really take me back in time, take me to before my dad confessed to my mom. Mysteriously, the phone spoke. As you wish. But why didn't you just tell your mother about the future? Why choose to separate them by damaging her reputation? Everly was lost in thought for a long while before finally smiling. You don't know my mom, she's the kindest, most soft-hearted person in the world. If I hadn't made her dislike me first, she would have stopped me. She might even have walked the same painful path again just for my sake. Now I finally understood Everly's biggest secret. She loved me. She had always loved me. Tears suddenly poured down my face. I tried to reach out and grab my daughter from the vision but could only watch her fade away. Choking back sobs, I watched her becoming increasingly transparent. Everly, would you still want to be mom's daughter in the next life? She looked at me, smiling innocently. Of course I would. Everly Jeong might not be a kind girl, but to mom, she was always a good daughter. I shook my head, forcing one last smile. I'm sorry, and thank you. Waking up, I faced the empty seat across from me, tears streaming down my face. I knew this time-traveling journey of love had finally ended. The doctors said Ethan would live but might never wake up. They said when he was brought in covered in blood, he was still clutching that crystal swan necklace. I just stared at the sky, lost in thought. In the distance, Ing waved to me, smiling. Aurora. Let's go to the beach. Beside her, Xavier looked at me with gentle eyes. I stood up and ran to them. Let's go. The next summer, I graduated high school with all the other seniors. As summer faded, we entered college together. 4 years later, I graduated from law school with honors and became a successful attorney. Xavier and I got married, with both families' blessing. My favorite pastime became teasing Ing to call me Auntie. She'd chase me around, demanding to know exactly when I'd fallen for her uncle's tricks. 3 years after marriage, I got pregnant. Xavier totally supported my choices, saying I could keep working or stay home, whatever I wanted. He said with a straight face, I could just quit the company hazing now anyway. I'd love to be your personal house husband. When Ing heard this, uncle and niece caused their usual chaos. When I was 7 months pregnant, mom told me Ethan had woken up. She said, you spent so many years together. When you have time, maybe go see him. After a moment's silence, I nodded. That weekend, Xavier and I went to the hospital, unexpectedly running into Melanie in the lobby, whom I hadn't seen in years. I remembered how she'd had to leave school because of her family's debt collectors causing trouble. I heard she never took the college entrance exam, instead working in a small city to pay off debts. Looking at Melanie now, she wore faded old clothes, holding a little boy's hand, looking exhausted. But seeing me, she still showed that same resentful expression. Aurora. She clenched her fists bitterly. Why? Why do you get all the luck? Why aren't you the one who ended up miserable? I found it laughable when she needed to focus most on her studies, she'd wasted time fighting over Ethan. Now that her life was hard, she blamed others for having good luck. I saw no point in engaging, so I just walked away holding Xavier's hand. In Ethan's room, he was staring absently at the sunlight through the window. Time had left its marks on his face, but the darkness in his eyes cleared when he saw me. His voice trembled. Aurora. I'd completely made peace with the past, so I nodded to him. But his slight smile vanished when he saw Xavier behind me, then noticed my pregnant belly. Ethan looked at me sadly for a long, long time. Finally, he closed his eyes and said softly, Aurora, I wish you happiness. Touching my belly, I gave him a genuine smile. Thank you. 3 months later, I gave birth to a daughter. Her eyes sparkled like stars, tiny and precious in Xavier's arms, making the usually cool and serious man melt completely. But when I noticed the small mole between her nose, my eyes suddenly filled with tears.